Mark Thompson, a successful 38-year-old entrepreneur, ran a luxury boutique hotel in the heart of California's bustling hospitality scene. His life appeared to be flawless: a sprawling mansion in the upscale Santa Monica area, a fleet of high-end cars, and a beautiful wife, Emily, who worked as a director of marketing for a prominent tech company. Together, they had built the life most could only dream of: a thriving business, a picture-perfect family, and a son, Lucas, who was just 3 years old. The Thompsons were the epitome of success. Mark's business was doing exceptionally well, and Emily's career was on a steady upward trajectory. On the surface, everything was perfect. The parties they attended, the friends they kept, the vacations they took, all of it was an outward display of their accomplishment. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, subtle cracks began to appear, unnoticed at first, but soon impossible to ignore. It all began with an unexpected invitation. One quiet evening, as Mark sat in his office reviewing plans for a new hotel project downtown, Emily came in holding a sleek, silver envelope. "Mark," she said, her voice tinged with excitement, "I just got an invitation to the annual gala at my company. It's this Saturday and I really want you to come. It's a huge event, and it's important for my career." Mark glanced at the elegant invitation in her hand. He wasn't particularly thrilled about the idea. He had a mountain of work to do, and the gala, as far as he was concerned, seemed like just another overhyped event for people with too much time on their hands. Emily's company was full of highly ambitious people, and Mark didn't usually find their company enjoyable. But he could see the look on her face, the one that told him this wasn't a simple request. "Do I have to?" he asked, though he knew the answer already. "You know it's important, Mark," Emily replied, her tone soft but firm. "It's about networking, making connections. I don't want to go alone." Mark hesitated for a moment. His work on the new hotel was pressing, but he knew that missing this event could send the wrong message to Emily's colleagues. He had always supported her career, but this gala felt like one more event in a long line of obligatory social affairs he had been dragged into. Still, he relented. "All right, I'll go. But only because it matters to you," Mark said, putting his pen down and looking at her with a half smile. That Saturday evening, Mark found himself standing in a grand ballroom, surrounded by elegantly dressed individuals sipping champagne and chatting about business, technology, and the latest trends in Silicon Valley. The lights were soft, the music was smooth, and the atmosphere felt too perfect, too orchestrated. Mark felt out of place, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the relaxed ease of the tech world. But he forced himself to smile and mingle, occasionally glancing at Emily, who was already deep in conversation with a few people from her company. As the night wore on, Mark's discomfort grew. He stood by the hors d'oeuvres table, half listening to a conversation between Emily and a man he hadn't yet met. The man was younger than Mark, sharply dressed in an expensive suit that fit him perfectly. His name was David, and he was a senior associate at Emily's company. David had a confidence about him that Mark couldn't help but notice. He was animated as he spoke, making everyone around him laugh. Emily, too, seemed particularly engaged with him. She was smiling, laughing at his jokes, her body language open and friendly. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their interaction than a simple business conversation. Despite the growing discomfort in his chest, Mark tried to push the feeling aside. Maybe he was overthinking it, he told himself. Emily was just being her usual, friendly self. But as the evening wore on, something in the air began to shift. Emily's attention remained fixed on David, and their exchanges grew more intimate, more familiar. Mark watched as David leaned in just a little too close, as Emily's laughter lingered a little too long. The more he observed, the more a knot tightened in Mark's stomach. His wife, the woman he thought he knew inside and out, seemed to be sharing a side of herself with David that Mark had never seen before, an intimacy that made him uneasy. It was when they finally made their way home that Mark's suspicions began to solidify into something darker. As the car pulled into their driveway, the quiet of the evening settled in. The house was still, but Mark's mind raced. He couldn't shake the image of Emily and David, her eyes locked on his, her soft laughter, the way they had seemed to share an unspoken connection. After Emily had gone to bed, Mark stayed up, pacing around the house, unable to sleep. He kept thinking back to the evening, to the strange feeling he had gotten from the way Emily and David had interacted. There was something about it that didn't sit right. Unable to shake the thoughts from his mind, Mark made a decision. He walked quietly into the bedroom where Emily's phone lay on the nightstand. He knew it was a violation of her privacy, but in that moment, his curiosity overwhelmed him. He picked up the phone, unlocked it, and began scrolling through her messages. What he found shattered the image of their perfect life. Messages between Emily and David filled with intimate exchanges, plans to go on vacation together, inside jokes and flirtatious remarks that went beyond the professional. It was clear now. There was something between them, something that Mark hadn't seen coming. His heart sank as he pieced together the fragments of their secret relationship. This wasn't just an innocent work friendship. Emily and David had been hiding something that was about to change everything. Mark stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of what he had discovered pressing down on him. He had been betrayed. And now he had to figure out what to do next. The man who had spent years building his empire, his perfect life, now found himself facing the collapse of everything he had worked for. It was time to make a move. The days following the gala were a blur for Mark. His mind kept returning to the images on Emily's phone, those private messages between her and David. Each time he thought about it, his stomach tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. He could no longer ignore the truth. His wife, the woman he had spent 7 years building a life with, had betrayed him. And David, the charming, confident man from the gala, was right in the middle of it. That Saturday night, as Mark lay awake in bed, he couldn't stop replaying the events of the gala over and over again. The way Emily had laughed a little too much at David's jokes, the way she had touched his arm casually, the way her gaze had lingered longer than it should have. Everything had seemed innocent at first, but now, in the aftermath, it felt like a carefully constructed facade. He knew what he had to do. But first he needed to find more evidence. It wasn't enough to have a few text messages. Mark needed to understand the full extent of Emily's betrayal. The next day he pretended everything was fine. He went about his routine, attending to his hotel business, overseeing the renovations at his downtown property, and keeping up appearances with Emily. But his mind was consumed with one thought: how could he get back at them? How could he make sure Emily and David paid for what they had done? Mark knew Emily. He knew how important her career was to her, how much she valued the image of success that came with working at the top tech company in the industry. That knowledge would be his weapon. Over the next few days, he dug deeper into the work he had been doing with Emily's company. He had access to several major contracts with hotels that had been secured through her firm, some of which were worth millions. It didn't take long for Mark to realize that he held a significant amount of influence over these deals. The contracts weren't just a financial lifeline for his business. They were also deeply intertwined with Emily's company's success. If he were to pull the plug on any of these partnerships, it could cause a ripple effect. Emily's job, her reputation, and even her relationship with David could be at stake. The more Mark thought about it, the more he felt his plan taking shape. He would strike where it would hurt the most, he would take control of the contracts. If Emily and David thought they had him cornered, he would show them that he was in charge. But as he spent more time researching, a more chilling realization set in. Emily and David weren't just involved in a brief affair, they were planning a future together. Mark found evidence that they were already planning a vacation to a luxury resort in Hawaii, just the two of them. Emily had even bought new clothes for the trip, clothes that Mark knew she would never have purchased for herself. Mark felt a wave of anger flood through him. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal of everything he had built with Emily, everything they had shared. His life, his family, his business, all of it was on the verge of falling apart. By the end of the week, Mark had gathered enough information to make his move. He knew where the cracks were and he knew how to exploit them. The time for subtlety had passed. Now he needed to confront Emily and David head-on. On Monday morning, Mark called a meeting with his senior staff. He made it clear that the stakes were higher than ever. The hotel industry was cutthroat, and if he didn't act fast, someone else would swoop in and steal his deals. But he wasn't worried about that. Mark wasn't just thinking about the business anymore. He was thinking about revenge. That afternoon, he made a call to the CEO of the tech company where Emily worked. He requested a private meeting, citing the importance of a potential collaboration between their companies. As the day of the meeting approached, Mark prepared himself mentally for the confrontation that was coming. When Mark walked into the sleek, glass-walled office building of Emily's company, he felt a strange sense of power. He had never set foot in these corporate offices before, and now, here he was, holding the fate of the company in his hands. Mark was ushered into the CEO's office, where the meeting began. The CEO, a tall, composed man in his mid-40s, welcomed him with a handshake and a warm smile. They exchanged pleasantries for a few moments before Mark cut straight to the chase. "I need to talk to you about Emily," Mark said, his voice steady but full of tension. "And about her relationship with one of your employees, David." The CEO's expression faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "What's this about, Mark? We're not sure what you mean. Mark didn't waste any time. He pulled out his phone, showing the CEO the screenshots of the text messages between Emily and David. He watched as the CEO's face turned pale, his lips tightening as he read the evidence Mark had gathered. The room became heavy with silence. I don't know what kind of relationship this is, Mark continued, but I think you need to understand that it's affecting not just your company but my business as well. These two, Emily and David, they've been planning things behind my back. And I think it's time that you make some decisions. The CEO remained quiet for a moment, then looked up at Mark with a somber expression. We will take this seriously, he said. But what are you asking for, exactly? Mark smiled, the taste of victory on his tongue. I want David fired. And Emily? I want her out as well. She's compromised her position and violated the trust we had. If not, I'll pull every single contract I have with your company. You'll lose more than just a hotel deal. You'll lose a major partner. The CEO's expression hardened. Mark could see the weight of the decision settle over him, but Mark wasn't finished yet. Let's just say, he added, I'm giving you a chance to make things right before this blows up for everyone. The CEO nodded slowly as if weighing his options. The room hung in an uneasy quiet. Mark knew he had just taken the first step in a much bigger game, and he couldn't help but feel the rush of control surge through him. The battle had only just begun. Mark's heart raced as he left the CEO's office. The conversation had gone better than expected. Much better. He could see it in the CEO's face. He was rattled. The evidence Mark had presented was undeniable, and Mark knew it wouldn't be long before the company moved on Emily and David. But there was still work to be done. The game wasn't over yet. As Mark walked through the sleek, modern hallways of the tech company, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. He had just taken a massive step in asserting control over Emily's life, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still missing. He had to confront Emily. He had to see her face when she realized what he knew. That evening, after the day's work was done, Mark returned home, dreading the moment he would have to speak with Emily. He found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner for their family, a sight that once filled him with warmth. Now, it felt like an illusion, an image of normalcy that was no longer real. She didn't notice him standing at the doorway until he spoke. Emily, we need to talk, Mark said, his voice low but firm. She turned, a faint smile crossing her face. What's going on, Mark? You look tense. I'm not here for small talk, he replied, his tone cold. I know about you and David. Emily froze for a moment, her smile faltering. For just a split second, Mark could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. But she quickly regained her composure, as if she had been expecting this moment. I don't know what you mean, Emily said, her voice steady, though Mark could hear the underlying edge of defensiveness. Mark stepped forward, his hands sliding into his pocket as he pulled out his phone. He showed her the screenshots of their text messages, the flirtatious comments, the plans for a vacation, the private jokes that only confirmed what he had feared all along. Emily's face drained of color as she took in the evidence. Mark, she began, her voice trembling slightly, it's not what you think. It's just a mistake. A lapse in judgment. It meant nothing. Mark shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. A lapse in judgment? Is that what you're going to tell me? He felt a rush of anger rise in his chest, but he kept it in check. You've been planning a future with him, Emily. You and David, this wasn't just a mistake. You've been lying to me. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She stood there, her eyes flickering between the phone and Mark's face, as if trying to find a way out of this situation. But there was no escape. Mark wasn't giving her the chance to weasel her way out of it. Not this time. I want the truth, Mark demanded. How long has this been going on? How long have you been seeing him behind my back? Emily sighed, her shoulders sagging in defeat. She sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers clutching the edge as though she were trying to ground herself in some semblance of control. I never meant for it to go this far, she said softly. But it did. And I can't take it back now. Mark's mind reeled. He could barely comprehend what she was saying. The woman he had married, the mother of his child, the one he had trusted with everything, had betrayed him. There was no easy way to process it. His world, his carefully constructed life, was crumbling before him. I never wanted to hurt you, Emily continued, her voice filled with regret. But David, he's different. He understood me in ways you didn't. He was there when I needed someone, Mark. It just happened. Mark clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. So what now, Emily? Are you just going to leave me for him? Is that it? Emily shook her head, her eyes pleading with him. No, it's not like that. I never wanted to leave you. I've been confused. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo what I've done. Mark felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. You can't undo it, Emily. The damage is done. And you've made your choice. His mind shifted back to his plans. He knew he couldn't let this go easily. Not only had she betrayed him personally, but now the stakes were even higher. He had to make sure Emily understood the consequences of her actions. It wasn't enough to confront her. He needed to dismantle everything she had built with David. You're going to lose your job, Emily, Mark said, his voice cold. I've already taken steps to ensure that. You're done at that company. And if David doesn't get fired, I'll make sure his career is finished too. Emily's face turned pale as the weight of his words sank in. Mark, please, she whispered, her voice shaky. You don't have to do this. I already have, Mark replied. You don't get to destroy everything we built and think you'll get away with it. As Emily sat there, silent and broken, Mark turned and walked out of the room. His mind was already moving on to the next step. The next part of his plan. He wasn't done with her yet. But the next chapter of his life he knew would be filled with challenges. The fallout from what he had just done would be far-reaching. And he was prepared to face it. Because he wasn't just fighting for his business anymore. He was fighting for his life, and his dignity. The days that followed Mark's confrontation with Emily were a blur of tension and calculated moves. Mark had unleashed a storm that couldn't be contained. He had taken control of the situation, but in doing so, he knew the consequences would ripple through his life and the lives of those around him. Emily's job was on the line. David's career hung in the balance. And Mark was about to make sure that his own business would not only survive the fallout, it would thrive. Emily barely spoke to him after their conversation. There was an emptiness in her eyes whenever she looked at him, an unspoken understanding that their marriage was as good as over. The tension between them was suffocating. She still wore her wedding ring, but Mark knew it was just a symbol now, a hollow reminder of a relationship built on lies. Mark, for his part, had no interest in reconciliation. He was done with the emotional back and forth. He had long since abandoned any hope that Emily could fix what she had broken. The only thing that mattered now was securing his position, both professionally and personally. In the days that followed, Mark worked tirelessly to leverage the information he had gathered. He had already contacted his lawyers to begin drafting the papers to dissolve his marriage, but he wasn't going to make it easy on Emily. He'd learned the hard way that some people only understood power when it was used against them. Emily's betrayal would cost her more than just her marriage, it would cost her everything she had worked for. Meanwhile, he kept a close eye on Emily's company. He had known it was only a matter of time before his threats would get results, and when the call finally came, it was from the CEO of her company. Mark, the CEO's voice was tense, but his words were measured. I've had a chance to review the situation, and we've decided to take action. David is being terminated, effective immediately. As for Emily, I'll leave that decision to you. However, her position here is untenable. We're going to part ways with her as well. Mark felt a rush of satisfaction, but he didn't let it show. He had expected this outcome, and it was precisely what he wanted. But he wasn't done yet. He had a few more cards to play. I appreciate that, Mark said, his voice cool and controlled. But I also want to make sure this doesn't happen again. If you want to keep working with my hotels, you'll need to make some changes. We'll talk terms once everything is in place. The CEO agreed, though Mark could tell he was anxious to get off the phone. The man knew he had been backed into a corner. Mark wasn't just a hotel owner anymore, he was a force to be reckoned with. The leverage he had over Emily's company would give him a powerful bargaining chip moving forward. Later that night, Mark sat in his office, staring out the window at the city lights. He could almost taste the victory now. But a nagging feeling kept tugging at the back of his mind. Despite the success of his plan so far, Mark knew he was still far from winning. His marriage was over, but there was more at stake than just his personal life. The damage had already been done to his family. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, an emptiness that no amount of revenge could fill. But Mark wasn't one to dwell on emotions. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he would make sure it continued to grow. He had taken down Emily and David, but now it was time to secure his position in the industry. He had already started negotiations with rival companies, offering his hotel services at a higher price, capitalizing on the uncertainty surrounding Emily's company. He knew the game well. He would make sure that the betrayal wasn't just a personal victory, it would be a financial one as well. The phone rang on his desk, snapping Mark out of his thoughts. It was his lawyer, a woman named Linda who had handled some of his biggest deals. Mark answered the call. "Mark," Linda's voice was crisp, "I have the paperwork ready. Your divorce filing is complete. We'll get the paperwork to Emily as soon as you're ready to move forward." Mark paused, his mind spinning with everything he had to juggle. "Let's move forward," he said, the decision firm in his voice. "But make sure she knows it's not just about the divorce. She's losing everything she thought she had, her job, her career, her reputation. This is her consequence." He hung up the phone, his fingers tapping against the surface of his desk. For a moment he felt a brief pang of guilt. But it was fleeting. The damage had been done. The betrayal had been too great and there was no turning back now. The next morning, as he stood at the front of a meeting with his senior staff, Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The people in the room were still loyal to him, his closest allies in the hotel business. But even they could sense the shift in the air. Mark wasn't just the man who had built a successful business anymore. He was the man who had taken control of his own life, who had struck back when everyone thought he was down. The meeting was brief, but Mark made sure to emphasize the importance of maintaining the hotel's reputation, despite the personal drama swirling around him. He had worked too hard to let anyone undermine what he had built. His focus was unwavering. The next step was clear. He would continue to grow his empire, strengthening relationships with other companies while leaving Emily and David in his dust. Later that day, as Mark took a moment to look over the documents for his next hotel expansion, he received an unexpected message. It was from Emily. She hadn't spoken to him since their confrontation, and Mark had no intention of letting her back into his life. But curiosity got the better of him and he opened the message. "I'm sorry, Mark," the text read. "I know I've hurt you and I can never undo what I've done. But please know that I never wanted to destroy everything we had. I'm just lost. I don't know who I am anymore. I hope someday you can forgive me." Mark stared at the screen, his thoughts swirling. For a brief moment, he almost considered replying. But he quickly closed the message and set the phone down. Emily's apology meant nothing now. She had made her choice. And so had he. The days after Emily's message passed by in a blur of business deals and hotel expansions. Mark had his eye firmly fixed on the future. His plans were unfolding just as he had hoped, and the vindication he had longed for was taking shape with each new deal, each new success. But despite all his achievements, there was a gnawing emptiness inside him, a hollow feeling that lingered long after his triumphs. It wasn't guilt or regret. No, Mark knew he had done what was necessary. What he was feeling was something much more complex. The slow realization that revenge, no matter how satisfying in the moment, didn't heal the wounds. He hadn't expected forgiveness from Emily. He hadn't expected any form of reconciliation. But part of him, just a small part, had hoped for some kind of closure, something that would give him peace. And yet, here he was, still staring at the remnants of the life he had once thought perfect, feeling the absence of the woman who had been by his side for years. As the weeks passed, Mark became more engrossed in his work, diving into new projects, meeting with potential investors and negotiating the terms of his latest hotel partnership. But even amidst the whirlwind of success, he could not escape the weight of the situation at home. Emily had moved out. She had left their home, taking with her only the things she deemed necessary. Her absence was a constant presence in the house, a space that once felt alive with the sounds of their son's laughter, now eerily silent. Mark had become accustomed to the quiet, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. One night, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, Mark found himself sitting alone at his desk, staring at the contracts that had been signed. His business was thriving, but his personal life was in ruins. He hadn't heard from Emily in days, and while he had no intention of reaching out to her, he couldn't help but wonder how she was doing. Did she regret what had happened? Did she miss him? Or was she too caught up in her own world with David? The phone rang, snapping Mark from his thoughts. It was Linda, his lawyer. "Mark," she said, her voice calm but serious. "I just received an update. The papers are finalized. Emily signed the divorce agreement, and the financial settlement has been reached. It's over." Mark sat back in his chair, taking in the news. Part of him had known it was coming. But hearing the finality of it, hearing it spoken aloud, struck a chord deep within him. It was over. There was no going back. Emily was out of his life for good. "Good," Mark said, his voice steady, though a tightness had formed in his chest. "Let's make sure the transition is smooth. I want to make sure everything is in place for Lucas. I don't want him to feel the effects of this more than necessary." "Of course," Linda replied. We've made arrangements for his care, and the custody agreement is in order. There's nothing to worry about. Mark ended the call, but he didn't move. He sat there, staring at the desk in front of him. He had everything he had ever wanted: a successful business, financial security, and now his freedom. But why did it feel like he had lost so much more? The following days were consumed with the logistics of the divorce. Emily had moved on with her life, and though Mark had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with her, there were still matters to settle. Property division, custody arrangements, the countless details that came with ending a marriage. He made it clear that his focus was on his son. Lucas had always been his greatest joy, and despite everything that had happened, he would not let his personal feelings affect his relationship with his child. But even as he signed papers and met with lawyers, Mark's mind kept returning to Emily. He had no illusions that they would ever reconcile. She had chosen David, and that was something Mark couldn't undo. Yet there was a part of him, buried deep beneath the anger and betrayal, that couldn't completely let go of what they had shared. The love they had built, the life they had created, now felt like a distant memory. It was a ghost that lingered at the edges of his consciousness. A week after the divorce papers were finalized, Mark received a call from Emily. It was the first time she had reached out since their confrontation months ago. "Mark," she said, her voice softer than he had remembered. "I know this is difficult, but I wanted to check in on Lucas. I miss him." Mark felt a sharp pang in his chest at the mention of their son. He had kept Lucas away from the chaos as much as possible, but he knew Emily had a right to see him. For a moment, he considered the possibility of allowing Emily back into their son's life, even if only for the sake of the child's well-being. "He's doing well," Mark replied cautiously. "I've been keeping him busy. I think he misses you too, but it's been hard for him to understand what's happening." "I know," Emily said, her voice faltering. "I never meant for things to end like this, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just lost. And I've made mistakes I can't undo." Mark closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. This wasn't the apology he had expected. It wasn't the grand gesture of regret he had imagined in his darker moments. It was simple and raw, a reflection of the mess they had created together. "I don't think there's anything we can say to fix this, Emily," Mark said quietly. "But Lucas is our priority now. I want him to have both of us in his life, even if we're not together anymore. That's all that matters." Emily was silent for a long moment. "You're right," she finally said. "I'll do whatever I can to be there for him. I'll figure out a way to make it right, for him." Mark hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of finality. It was over in every sense of the word. He had no more questions, no more doubts. Emily had made her choices and he had made his. There was no going back to what they had. But there was still the future, a future that Mark would build on his own terms. He wasn't done yet. The business world was still his arena, and the hotel empire he had built was only growing stronger. The lessons learned from his personal life, betrayal, loss, and revenge, had shaped him, but they would not define him. His focus now was clear. Mark Thompson was ready to move forward, stronger than ever. With or without Emily, he would succeed. And nothing would stand in his way. As the months passed, Mark threw himself deeper into his work. The emotional storm that had swept through his life was starting to settle, but the scars remained. He'd rebuilt his professional empire, and with each new project, each new deal, Mark felt a sense of accomplishment. Yet, there was something still missing, a void he had hoped would fill itself with success, but which remained stubbornly unfilled. He focused on his son Lucas more than ever. Their bond was his anchor now. Every weekend was spent together, bike rides in the park, visits to the beach, and nights spent watching movies on the couch. Mark made sure that Lucas felt loved and secure, even if the world around them had changed. Lucas had no understanding of the complexities of adult relationships. He only knew that his mom wasn't living with them anymore, but Mark did his best to shield him from the hurt. Despite the tension and awkwardness that lingered between Emily and him, Mark knew that Lucas needed both of them in his life. He kept his interactions with Emily limited and strictly about their son. There was no room for emotions or unresolved issues, only the need to co-parent, to provide Lucas with the stability he deserved. On the business front, things were going exceptionally well. Mark had secured a few lucrative contracts with new hotel chains, expanding his portfolio further into the competitive Los Angeles market. His name was now associated with the most sought-after properties in the city, and his reputation in the industry was unshakable. What had once seemed like a small boutique operation was now a thriving enterprise, attracting attention from investors, developers, and media outlets alike. Yet even as Mark's success grew, there was a constant tugging at his mind. He realized that while he had secured financial success and professional respect, he had never truly found peace. Every step forward seemed to come with the weight of the past on his shoulders. Revenge, however sweet at the time, had not brought the closure he had expected. He had won the battle, but the war inside himself still raged on. One evening, Mark sat in his office overlooking the city skyline. The lights of Los Angeles twinkled below him, a reminder of how far he had come. But as he looked out at the vast city, he realized that he wasn't content. There had to be more to life than this, more than contracts, money, and the remnants of a shattered marriage. He needed something deeper, something more meaningful. It was then that he received an unexpected call. It was from David, the man who had once been his rival, the one who had been at the center of his heartbreak. Mark had avoided any direct contact with David since the day he had exposed the affair, but now, as the call rang through, he felt a strange sense of curiosity. "Mark," David's voice was calm, almost apologetic. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I owe you an apology." Mark leaned back in his chair, surprised. He hadn't expected this. David's tone was sincere, lacking the arrogance and bravado that Mark had come to associate with him. "I don't expect you to forgive me," David continued, "but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. What happened between me and Emily? I was selfish and I know I've made a mess of everything. I regret it, Mark. More than you know." Mark remained silent for a moment, letting David's words sink in. He had every right to be angry, to continue the cycle of resentment. But something in David's voice made him pause. Perhaps David was genuinely remorseful, or perhaps it was just the passage of time that had allowed him to reflect on his actions. Either way, Mark realized that holding on to bitterness wouldn't bring him peace. "You've made your apologies, David," Mark said quietly, his voice steady. "And I'm not interested in keeping the anger alive. It's not for me anymore. What happened between us, between all of us, is in the past. It's done." David seemed to let out a breath of relief on the other end of the line. "Thank you, Mark. I didn't expect that." Mark shook his head, though David couldn't see the gesture. "There's no point in holding on to hate. Not anymore. We both have our lives to live, and all of us are just trying to move forward." "I appreciate that," David replied. "And I just hope that you're finding some peace in all of this." Mark thought about that for a moment. Was he finding peace? Not yet, but maybe he was closer than he had been. The business world had consumed so much of his attention that he had neglected to focus on what truly mattered. His own well-being, his relationships, and his happiness. "I'm getting there," Mark said, the words feeling more truthful than they ever had. "I'm not perfect, but I'm working on it." They ended the call shortly after, and Mark sat in silence, contemplating the conversation. It was strange to hear David speak with such humility, but it was also liberating. Perhaps this was the closure he needed, the final chapter in a saga that had started with anger, betrayal, and vengeance. He no longer needed to fight this battle. It was over. A few days later, Mark made a decision. He contacted his lawyer and made arrangements to shift the focus of his hotel business. Rather than continuing to expand in the competitive Los Angeles market, he began to invest in smaller boutique hotels, each one with a personal touch, each one reflecting a deeper sense of care and community. He realized that his earlier pursuits had been driven by ego, by a need to prove something to others, and to himself. But now he was ready to build something that mattered on a more personal level, something that would leave a legacy he could be proud of. He also began to spend more time with Lucas, taking him on longer trips, letting him experience the world outside the city, and showing him the value of kindness and humility. He had been so consumed by the need to win that he had lost sight of the most important thing in his life: his son. As Mark stood in front of the window looking at the city below, he realized that life was never just about winning. It was about moving forward, about finding peace, and about choosing how to build the future. The revenge that had once consumed him no longer held sway over his heart. It was time for a new chapter, a chapter focused on what truly mattered. Mark Thompson had emerged from the storm, stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever. The man who had once been defined by ambition and vengeance was now building a future rooted in integrity and love. And for the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he was finally on the path to true happiness.